back over a century and say we should have gotten rid of neoclassical theory 110 years ago.
That's the thing. The first thing they teach you when you start economics class, they teach you about the theory of the firm, all these things, and you get to uni, and then they start teaching you about the utility function and all these things.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about that? This is like the main. We don't even know that there are other ideas. This is what we're taught is these equations, like math. This is what economics is. This is it.
It's all wrong. It's all completely wrong, and every possible level. So, like when you have the idea of describing an individual's consumption using utility curve, indifference curves, that works on a sheet of paper when you have apples on the vertical axis and bananas on the horizontal, and you're supposed to work out what's the combination of apples and bananas that you're indifferent to, and that's not hard to do. It's even if you imagine like between 0 and 10 bananas and 0 and 10 apples, there's 121 combinations. It's pretty easy to work out which ones you prefer. The price is only one relative price. That's fine. When you try to say, let's add in like water, chocolate, watching videos, et cetera, each time you do that, you go for an extra dimension. So there's 100, if there's 0 to 9 choices for each on 2 dimensions, that's 100. Then at a third dimension, that's 1,000. At a fourth, that's 10,000, fifth, 100,000, blah, blah, blah. You get to the stage where you get a ridiculous array of potential combinations. Nobody's mind can keep track of it. So nobody shops that way. Okay? It's a false description of how people shop to begin with. Then when you try to aggregate it, if you heard what are called the Sonnenschein-Mantel-Debreu theorem?
Never.
Okay.
Never.
You've done the whole indifference curve. Is this going to be okay for the level of the audience?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you're victims of an economics degree, and if you've done microeconomics, you've done deriving an individual demand curve at some point from indifference curves. You've done that bit yourselves?
Yeah, so painful, but yeah.
It's so painful, okay. So what you draw, on the vertical axis, you draw the commodities you're not changing the price of, and on the horizontal, you draw the commodities you are buying, changing the price of. And you have an intercept on the vertical axis, which is your total income divided by the price of the other commodity. So, and that you assume those prices don't change and your income doesn't change. So what you then do is you say, well, let's change the price for bananas, $1 per banana, 50 cents per banana, blah, blah, blah. And then you get the straight line connecting spending all your income on the other goods to spending all your income just on bananas. That gets flatter. And then that means you can move out to a higher set of indifference curves. Do they take you through what they call Hicksian compensation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pain in the ass.
Pain in the ass. So because with that, downward sloping trick, if you do it with a commodity which is, like potatoes, the classic example they give, the cheaper the potatoes get, the less potatoes you buy. You buy more stuff because other food's more attractive. That's their explanation for the bloody Irish potato famine. So they then do the Hicksian compensation and then say, well, we readjust your income so that we compensate for the higher effective income you have because of the lower price. And therefore, what we do is we take points of tangency on each indifference curve. And that necessarily gets flatter as price gets higher. Therefore, law of demand, the price falls. Okay? Now, that's what you get taught in micro. Try to find in any textbook where they say what happens when you aggregate. You will find it stated in one textbook, which is Nordhaus and Samuelson and Nordhaus's textbook. And fittingly, for what I think of Nordhaus, there's a lie. Outright fucking lie at that point. Because what I say is, does the law of downward sloping demand curve apply to the market? It certainly does. Bullshit. Because what the mathematical economists did, this is Sonnenschein, Mantel, and Debreu in the late 60s, early 70s, what they acknowledged was that when you're working for an individual, you can presume their income isn't changed and the price of other goods isn't changed by changing the price of bananas. You keep those constant. But if you want to have a market for bananas in the whole of the UK, you've got 60 million people. As soon as you go from individual demand curve to market demand curve, you go from one person to 60 million. Now, when you change the price of bananas, you are going to affect the income of various people. So you can no longer keep that income constant, okay? If you had across the whole 60 million people to get the market demand curve, some are going to get their income boosted by bananas getting more expensive, some are going to get them fall. So that point of pivot on the individual curve moves for everybody. Now then, the mathematical economist said, under what conditions can we be sure you're still going to get a downward sloping demand curve? And here's where the nonsense, the addiction they have to that way of thinking comes in. The condition they came up with was that you will get a downward sloping demand curve so long as everybody has the same relationship between price and income, and that doesn't change with income. So that's, you heard what are called Ingalls curves?
Yeah, I'm not very familiar, but
the idea with an Ingalls curve is you have your like when you're doing the price derivation, what you're doing is you're changing the slope of the budget line, but you're not changing the point of the max. You're not changing the income. With an Ingalls curve, you move the income out. You say what's going to happen to your consumption, and they'll go through this garbage in the textbooks as well. Or they'll say, well, there is luxuries where. Or the necessities rather, where as your income rises, you spend proportionally less on that particular commodity. So toilet paper, okay? If your income raises by a factor of 1,000, you're not going to buy 1,000 times more toilet rolls. Okay? But if you take a look at Louis Vuitton handbags, then yes, that's going to curve. So what you get is necessities will have a curve that gets flatter, and luxuries will have a curve that gets steeper. Now, they're the only way to guarantee the result that they wanted for a downward sloping market demand curve was the Ingalls curve as a straight line. And better than that, it's the straight line for everybody. Now, they don't even realize this. That is proof by contradiction. Because they start from saying, imagine you've got two people with different tastes and two commodities with different characteristics. Under what conditions can you aggregate? When you have one person consuming one commodity. That's proof by contradiction. In other words, and this is what when you read the sensible people who did this, moderately sensible because they are neoclassical, Sonnenschein and Schaefer give the best interpretations of this result. And it's in the Handbook of Mathematical Economics, by the way. Okay? So, edited by Arrow and Intrillagator. So it's one of these top neoclassical publications. They say strong restrictions are needed to ensure that the market demand curve has the properties of an individual demand curve. So this is the real punchline. The utility function tells us nothing about the market demand curve. Now, do they teach you that? Of course not. Okay, that was a point where they said we simply cannot derive a market demand curve which has the characteristics we draw in every bloody textbook. So it's intellectual dishonesty on a grand scale. And it happens because it's a bit like you've got a bunch of Catholics, who end up finding the body of Jesus Christ. What do? They pretend it's somebody else. They don't take it seriously. So this just reeks all the way through the system. And they continue with this theory, even though they've managed to mathematically undermine it. And that's you people get this simplified, trivialized version in the textbooks, where if you read the actual literature and read it with a critical eye rather than a sycophantic eye, none of this stuff, we should have thrown it out, as I said, 110 years ago with the Peron Frobenius conditions, 80 years ago or 70 years ago with the Sonnenschein-Mantel-Burr theorem, because the first people to discover that were, what's his name, Gorman in 1953, the year I was born, 71 years ago, and Samuelson in 56. So that long ago, if they'd seriously assessed what they'd found, they would have said, we can't derive a market demand curve.
Yeah.
Well, what are we wasting our time with then? Okay. And the theory of supply, do you know the Housel's and the theory of supply?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, have you seen the research of like Fred Lee?
Never.
Okay. Fred Lee wrote a brilliant book called Post-Keynesian Pricing Theory. And what it really is an incredibly detailed history of economic thought of economists going out and surveying companies and finding out, do they have rising marginal cost? Now, every last survey, there's about 70 that have been done, every last survey has found the majority of firms report constant or falling marginal cost. Okay?
Yeah.
What do you get caught in the textbook?
The opposite.
Bullshit. Okay? And they simply refuse to look at it because it means, first of all, you don't have an upward sloping supply curve, so the whole marginal cost equals marginal revenue thing goes out the window. You can't derive a market demand curve that has the downward sloping carrot, the whole foundation is rotten. But they hang on to it because it's an incredibly seductive ideological vision of capitalism.